Hi, I'm Stephanie Rubitz. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing on with our corset series and we're talking about how to take our own measurements. Okay, I know I said that we would actually get into the making of the corsets this week, and then I printed out my patterns and I put them together and I took my measurements and I was adjusting my patterns, and then I realized you're going to need to know how to take your measurements. So we're going to do that first. You're going to need, of course, a measuring tape. You're going to need something to write your measurements on. And I recommend grabbing a couple lengths of elastic. I like using this wider, like 1-inch elastic, because I also use this when I measure myself for doing pants, and I like to know where my waistband is actually going to sit. But really, you can pick any elastic that you want, is totally fine. We need one to go around your waist and one to go around your high hip. All right, so we're going to be taking measurements for your bust, your underbust, your waist, your high hip, and the distance in between all of those things. Now, as always, when it comes to taking measurements, we've all got some pre-programmed BS about sizing and stuff like that. So always when you take your own measurements, please be gentle with yourself. Don't get hung up on numbers or anything like that. We're not talking about size today, we're talking about fit. Okay, that's how we need to look at this. So I'm wearing clothes that were sort of as fitted as possible to try and show you everywhere. But if you're taking your own measurements, then you might want to do it with a shirt off. Do you wear a bra? Don't you wear a bra? That really depends. I mean, some people say there's a hard and fast rule. Oh, you should always wear a bra. You should never wear a bra. It really depends on your body. If your girls like to go south when you're not wearing one, and that's not where you want them in your corset, you might want to have them picked up when you're taking your measurements. All right, so for my first elastic, it is at my waist. This is the smallest part of me, and it's also where I bend the most, when I bend side to side, so that's how I know where that one goes. The reason, by the way, that I'm putting these elastics on is because, you know, we're going to measure the circumferences and then we're going to measure the distance between them, and it's really easy to just not put your tape in the same place as where you measured your circumference. So this it gives you sort of a landmark of where you're measuring to, and then your measurements are going to be really consistent. Now, yeah, it's great to have somebody help you measure yourself, but in these crazy pandemic times, a lot of us gotta do stuff on our own, so that's how we're doing this. All right, now I'm trying to keep these as horizontal as possible. I have a monitor right here, I have a mirror right here. It's really beneficial if you have something that you can check yourself in. So, the high hip, not the fullest part of the hip. It's, if I were sitting, it's right where my leg creases up, okay? So the first measurement is going to be full bust, which if you've been sewing for any amount of time, you've probably taken your full bust measurement a lot of times. Now, as for the circumference of my underbust, my bra band is my marker for that, okay? So you want to make sure there's no twists, obviously, in your tape, and that you're checking in a mirror that your tape measure is level. And what I want to get you to try and not to do is to try and look at your tape while it's on you. Mark with your finger where that measurement is and then pull it out and look, okay? It's super hot in here right now. Oh, goodness. Okay, before you measure your waist, take a look at your pattern and see, does it ask for your waist measurement or your corset waist measurement? Because if it's asking for your corset waist measurement, it's asking you for the measurement that you want to cinch down to, okay? So what you can do is you can pull your measuring tape and see what your measurement is. If it's asking for your corset waist measurement, if it's asking for your regular waist measurement, just measure your waist. Same at the hips. Make sure that you're as horizontal as you can be. All right, the next measurements that we have to measure are the height difference between all of those measurements. So to measure from the bust, we're not going to measure from the bust to the underbust. We're gonna measure it to our waist. The reason being, if we're going all the way around our bust, that we're going around a curve, right? So it's gonna end up being longer than it really needs to be. We're measuring the height of the garment, not the distance of our curves, which we'll talk about again in a little bit, but it's really hard on my monitor because everything's opposite. No, yeah, yes, there we go. So your underbust to the waist. I'm using this thick elastic, so I'm going to choose whether I'm going to measure to the top or the bottom of it because I have an inch difference here, right? Just so that I'm being consistent. So I'm going to measure to the top. Now before I measure in between these, here's the important thing. Your corset is as long as you are, not as long as your curves are. So if you've got like more of a curve and your measuring tape has to like come out around the curve, that's going to sort of skew your measurements and make the corset longer than it needs to be for the length of you as like your height. So you want to try and get this measurement in the straightest place that you can. And if you have to, you can look in a mirror and you can sort of pull your measuring tape out so that it is straight. If you really, really wanted to, you could totally use a ruler. So that you are getting as straight a line as you can. Go ahead, car with no muffler. So there's a few measurements that I'm going to get you to take that will not likely be in your corset instructions. And that is, first of all, the distance from apex to apex, okay? Now, even though we did the circumference of the bust and the circumference of the underbust, what I want you to measure next is just the front, okay? And you can use the side seams of your shirt as your guide for that. So again, you just make sure that you can look that you're as horizontal as possible, which I'm not quite. Landmark it on your side seams of your shirt and see what your measurement is. Same for the underbust. Those front measurements are going to be very, very important when it comes to actually adjusting our pattern, because we're going to adjust our pattern before we ever do a mock-up. We want to do as few mock-ups as possible, ideally only one, especially if you're somebody who has a larger chest. If you're having to do full bust adjustments on shirts and stuff like that, then you're probably going to have to take that into account with your corset as well. And it's just better to know that ahead of time. One thing you might notice when you go to see what size you are to cut out your pattern, I always like circle my measurements on the chart just so I can see where I'm at. And I'm somebody who always has to grade between sizes, right? My bust is a different size as my waist, as my hips. What you're gonna notice with a corset pattern, because the sizes are incrementally smaller, like the lines, here we are. This is a piece that I've already adjusted. You can see how close together these lines are. It's gonna look crazy to you if you've never made a corset before, because it's gonna look like, oh my gosh, my bust is like 6 sizes bigger than my waist. Again, this is not like, don't get hung up on the size. This is all about fit. And one thing I will say is the Ariana Black corset, that's what this one is. She's got all of her sizes in alphabet form instead of number form, which I see more and more pattern designers doing this, and I absolutely love it, because as much as, you know, you try and deprogram yourself from those things that like to break down your confidence, for some of us, it's been in there for a long time. It's hard to erase it. So that's why I had to mention it anytime we're talking about measurements. Okay, so now that we have our measurements, we are ready to cut out our patterns, and that is what we will be doing next week. And then we will be taking a look at how to alter our pattern right off the get-go so that we're not having to make a bajillion mock-ups. next week. See you then.